Moon Knight Episode 5 turns out to be hot garbage. Surprise, surprise, and we're going to talk about it coming up. Before I jump into my thoughts on this episode, I just wanted to say thanks to everybody that checked out the ongoing review. Smack the like button if you want, comment below, maybe sub to the channel, and let's do this. Ozymandias from Breaking Bad, this definitely isn't. We open on Mom blaming Mark for the death of a younger brother we didn't know we didn't know Mark had until this point. We jump back into Harrow's office where he talks down Mark as he's inpatient in a mental facility, needle to the neck. Which, as anybody in the medical field knows, we don't typically deliver sedatives directly to the jugular, but whatever, I guess it makes for good drama. We get more exposition from the hippo god, Taweret. How Steven, the Egyptological expert, didn't recognize this creature ahead of time is beyond me. He seemed pretty proficient in that knowledge at every other junction. And one would have thought he'd have been more awestruck than screaming like a little girl, but whatever. We get next up on the air-quoted Ship of the Dead. We're heading to the afterlife for judgment. We're back in the asylum. They put together a plan to balance their scales so they can hopefully either ascend to the next life or get off the Ship of the Dead. Then we jump to a different part of the asylum where we're getting memories of Mark. We walk into a room that's full of all the victims of people that he had killed as a mercenary. He, for some reason, laments why one of them didn't kill him first, which is kind of odd because you'd think as a mercenary he probably only killed people, didn't have an issue with killing. It didn't seem like the room was full of small children or anything like that. There were no busfuls of nuns in that room. And if he had killed innocent people, wouldn't it stand to reason that Khonshu wouldn't have deemed him worthy to be the Fist of Vengeance? We get a little quick look at what happened to Mark's little brother Roro and how that led to the personalities of Steven's formation. That's completely new to the character. It does not happen anywhere in the canon that I could find when I looked it up, and I think that it could have been a fun or at least interesting thing to go over in the show had it been given any time to actually develop over the 6 episodes, but they seem more interested in having Layla lead him on a rando goose chase around the better part of London and Egypt for 2.5 episodes, so we didn't actually get any development there. So as a catalyst of change for Mark's character, it came off completely flat. I literally didn't care. Mark's mom blames him for the death of Roro at the funeral. She's literally the worst mother I've ever seen ever at this point. She's completely unlikable, and I think the grief is completely unfounded considering that Mark might look like he was like 10 or 12 when little brother Roro, who was probably 7 or 8, died in a drowning accident. So that was awful. We get more running around with Marc and Steven. We get the reveal of how Mark attempted to protect Layla's father and other hostages from his boss killing them. He was fatally wounded. He finally becomes Moon Knight in the transformation scene. So you get that origin clip, episode 5 of 6 into a limited series. Bad play, guys, bad play. We're back on the ship. Hippo God says time's running out. Then we're instantly back to the asylum where Steven's at the forefront and he's telling Mark they have to hurry because Harrow's almost won. Mark throws a temper tantrum and smacks himself in the face a few thousand times, and yet another deconstructing moment for heroes. Super not fun for me to watch, guys. Thank you very much. We're back in the office as Mark again now. More talkie-talkie happens. It's really dull. I didn't care. Steven reemerges back to the forefront. Harrow makes Steven call his mother on the phone, and we find out, surprise, surprise, she's been dead all along, and he's mostly just struggling to cope with all this nonsense. I will say here, Oscar Isaac is wasted in this scene. He turns in an excellent performance. It's full of grief and sorrow, and it looks exactly like how I would expect a grown man in that situation to react to to hearing his mother's passed. It's a shame that once again his talents weren't taken advantage of by Disney Corporation. It's something they cast him in. So Mark remembers his breakdown after his mother's death. He cries again. Steven jumps in and makes peace with everything. They're back on the boat. They're in front of the Osiris gates, which is like the junction to the different parts of the Egyptian underworld where they could wind up. We get the obligatory zombies crashing the ship to fight in front of the gates. There's a fight. Mark does okay for a couple seconds. Steven powers up for a couple seconds and gets yanked overboard and is frozen in the sand. And then Mark wakes up in the Field of Reeds, the end. Which means that now, by my count, they have an hour or less to have Layla save him, release Khonshu from his prison, defeat Harrow, who will hopefully get a CGI power-up before Layla devises the key to saving the day. There is so much that I don't like about this show, and I really can't even get into all of it here. Mostly what I have are just unanswered questions that could have been core functional story points that they could have built something interesting off of. But it looks like we're not going to get any of that, guys. It looks like we're legitimately just going to get some hodgepodge of basic psychotherapy bullshit that really Disney doesn't have the writers on staff to handle with any kind of subtlety or nuance. And I'm convinced that this whole project started as a spec script for a D-list Marvel character, and then wound up being repurposed as a limited series just for content on Disney+. It looks like they took something that was probably 120 pages or so, realized they didn't have a hit on their hands in terms of like MCU universe in theaters, and then just chopped it up. Which is what a lot of people, myself included, had to say about the Book of Boba Fett fiasco that they just went through. They had probably a treatment for a movie that was 2 hours, hour and a half long, had to cut it up into 4 or 5 episodes, realized most of that was garbage, and then had to import, Luke Skywalker and Baby Yoda from The Mandalorian to flesh that out and make it remotely watchable. But here are a couple of pet peeves that I just have about this show. Like, first of all, why does an Egyptian goddess sound like a chipper British chick using American slang? Like, I can't imagine that any being that's timeless in origin would be saying things like, oh, I was rooting for you guys, and just act surprised that things she did or didn't do wouldn't have worked. It just doesn't, I don't like that presentation. Like, god deity figures are supposed to be venerable types that are just timeless and old and kind of, maybe even bored of what humanity is currently doing, and that character just fell completely flat for me. She seems like literally something right off of like a children's cartoon, and it's not effective. We didn't get Layla in this episode, and I'm okay with that. It still annoys me that she got the Tomb Raider scenes to herself in the previous episode, and it makes me wonder, why can't Mark do anything interesting besides being led around different buildings and corridors and streets, whining and crying? It's such a waste of a hero. And by my calculation, Mark Spector has now spent more time in a mental patient's jumpsuit than he actually has in the suit. And when I crunched the numbers, it was something like he spent something like 11 and a half minutes actually costumed up as Moon Knight, and the show itself has about 10 minutes of credits and titles before each episode in total. So he's been in costume only slightly more than there have been opening titles for the show. That's a shit ratio to have for a superhero show. We have here a superhero show about the Fist of Vengeance for an Egyptian god of justice, and it's come up unshockingly short in the vigilante department. Like, what the hell has this clown done for 5 hours except bitch and whine about stuff they didn't show you until now and didn't really build to because they wasted so much other time in the pursuit of the widget golden scarab beetle compass thing that they didn't end up getting. It's all a ball drop. And speaking of ball drops, the dissociative disorder stuff is handled poorly as well. Marc and Steven are all but indistinguishable now. Both are comically inept buffoons, and the final nail in the coffin of Integrity Agency is them needing to reach Layla to rescue them again. Like, who are these guys? Like, I don't understand how between the two of them, with their vastly different points and areas of expertise, they can't devise a way to get things done. It's obnoxious. Who does the pack have to savage exactly to get a superhero show where the main character are actually superheroes? They did it again here. We had an interesting first episode. It teased a little bit of badassery to come ahead, and then we spend an episode digging into Mark's past, which is a total fabrication of the show writers and not at all a part of the lore. It added no depth and came off as superficial, strained, and full of unlikely family drama. But his younger brother actually survives well into adulthood and becomes a mercenary antagonist of his own that squared off with Mark a bunch of times. I'm guessing they're not saving this for season 2, because I'm guessing a limited series like this isn't getting a season 2, but God, I hope not. We get a couple of other throwaway lines to Bushman and the forced connection to Layla's father, which was all a pointless subplot and likely set to be abandoned, just like the third personality arc. They hinted they were going to bring in the Jake Lockley personality, but with one episode left, if they bring him in now, it's just going to look like it was a complete shoehorn. You also get zero meaningful insight into Mark's military career, his initial ally Frenchie, his initial partner and love interest Marlene, or any flashbacks at all to his mercenary work that he might have come to regret. They should have shown this and not just told us this. And that brings me back to the things he regretted. Why would little brother Roro be in the room with Mark's victims unless he actually killed him? It was a drowning accident, and whether or not Mark felt guilty about it doesn't mean that he actually killed the kid. And if he was there, if that did happen that way and he actually did kill the kid, I say again, how does Khonshu decide he's the one to take up the cape? It doesn't make any sense. It's just inconsistent start to end. There's one more question before I go. It's, why are these shows insistent on giving us watered down, nutless versions of classic superheroes? I can't imagine the number of viewers interested in these deconstructions exceeds or even remotely approaches the number that would have enjoyed seeing Moon Knight square off with any of the nearly 50 villains in his personal rogues gallery. It just seems like more wasted time again. That's all I'm going to do on this one here. We got one episode to go. I'll bring the fire for the final review in episode 6. I'll really get into the scene-by-scene breakdowns. Thanks again for stopping by, guys, and I'll see you next week.